Lee Myung-bak, who, the South Korean president, who is a former business CEO, was giving a speech to a room like this of Korean public servants. And he made a very good point, which I think should resonate everywhere. He said, look, we Koreans are dogged, we're determined, we are strong-willed and very proud. And he said, we will often pursue strategies until the point where they have completely and utterly failed, where you're just left with a burning ruin of a policy. And he said, we've got to stop doing that. He said, we've got to become much more thoughtful and objective about what we're doing. And if something is not working, if a particular policy approach is not working, then say, okay, that's not working, change gear, start again. And the way I've often expressed it in other contexts, dust yourself off and have another go. And that is very important in policy. So identify what it is you're trying to achieve and justify it in terms of the evidence. Now, having done that, you've then got to ensure that the means you use to achieve it are the most cost-effective. Having good intentions is not enough. Wanting everyone in Australia to have fast broadband is maybe a noble aspiration, but one is entitled to say, so what? So how are you going to deliver it? And the objective for government should always be to ensure that every measure they undertake, every objective they seek to pursue, is pursued in the most cost-effective way. In other words, they seek to achieve their goal, the bang, for the least amount of taxpayers' bucks. And that should be the objective always. Now, when Kevin Rudd came into office in 2007, he undertook, or I think Lindsay Tanner undertook on his behalf, that there would be no infrastructure projects undertaken or funded by the Commonwealth Government of any consequence if they had not been the subject of a rigorous cost-benefit analysis. And all a cost-benefit analysis means, as I'm sure you know, is simply looking at what is the most cost-effective way of achieving it, of achieving the goal. And governments and corporations and universities do this all the time. I mean, we were treated to an example of it in Brisbane only the other day when the Public Works Committee was considering a proposal to spend $50 million by Defence on some garages and hangars and some classrooms relating to some new vehicles. And there was a very competent team from Defence who said, yep, we've done a cost-benefit analysis, we looked at other locations, we looked at leasing, not building, we looked at building in one location versus several locations, and they explained it all. Now, whether that was the right call or not, only time will tell, but at least they went through the exercise. And that's good, and that is something that government should always be prepared to do. And of course, this is probably our single biggest criticism of the whole NBN saga, that notwithstanding we all agree that there should be universal broadband, fast broadband at an affordable price, the government failed to do that cost-benefit analysis. The other thing that is important is that government should develop policy consultatively and inclusively. You've got to bring people along with you. Now that's, sometimes events compel governments to make quick decisions and you can't consult or involve people as much as you would like, but wherever possible you should do so. The mining tax is a classic example, really a baffling example of this failure to consult and involve. You may remember the first incarnation of it, the so-called resource super profits tax, really came out of left field and horrified the industry, it horrified the financial sector, and it became very unpopular and probably was a large factor in contributing to Kevin Rudd's deposition by Julia Gillard. Now, curiously, at the outset, and for some time, there had been quite a lot of agreement between the industry and government about what needed to be achieved at a high level. historically, mineral royalties have been levied as a percentage of revenue, or in some cases as on a value per dollars per tonne basis. So either on revenue or volume. And the industry has argued for some time that they would prefer to have royalties based on some sort of profit or net cash flow basis, because clearly you can have very big revenues, and if the prices have come down as they do with commodities from time to time, and your costs have remained where they are, you can be paying exactly you can paying very big royalties, but on very, very much diminished profits. So there was restructuring the basis of royalties was something where there was a degree of support. And you would think that the government would have been able to take that general sentiment from the industry, consult with it, and then build up a case for a change. And now, inevitably, at the end of the day, there would be a difference of opinion. The industry would want to pay less tax, the government would want them to pay more. But if you can bring people down the track so they're pretty close, then at least the scope for disagreement is limited. And yet, look what happened. You had this extraordinary proposal that 40% of the earnings of the net revenues of a project over the long-term Commonwealth government bond rate should be paid to the government as a resource super profits tax. And this was justified on the basis that the government would reimburse a project for 40% of its losses if at the end of the project it had net losses. It hadn't recovered its investment. So in other words, there was a put, so it was argued, to the government of 40% of the losses. And so the proposition was, therefore, the cost of capital as to 40% of a project should be no more than the long-term Commonwealth government bond rate. Now, this is so theoretical, so academic, so absurd, so unreal, that it could only have been cooked up, frankly, in Treasury or in some other ivory tower. And of course, when it was exposed to the public, it was seen, and to the business community, it was seen for the folly that it was. And if that had been floated in a more consultative way, as an option, and debated more, it would have been shot down long before the government attached their own credibility to it, and a more realistic approach could have been undertaken. The other thing that is very important in politics is conviction, and this really is one of the problems I think that Labor has had on a range of areas, and not least on climate change. The turn that, or the event that really sent Kevin Rudd standing down into the mine, taxed or untaxed, a very deep one, was when he walked away from the emissions trading scheme. Now, obviously, the coalition is against an emissions trading scheme. We'll just put that on the record in case you haven't noticed. But Kevin Rudd had been very much for it, and had got a mandate to introduce it, and had said it was the greatest moral challenge of our time. And then, yet when he walked away from it, even though there were obviously people in the Labor Party, including Julia Gillard, telling him this was a smart thing to do, he suddenly appeared to be a person of no conviction, of no principle, of having nothing in here, nothing in his heart. And my opinion, people will forgive politicians up to a point. You can't stretch this, I might say. But they'll forgive you up to a point for a degree of incompetence. They will forgive you if things go wrong, because things go wrong all the time in our own lives. We bungle things, we lose our passports, we give the wrong directions to our friends. Also, we make mistakes all the time, so we can understand governments do that. But one of the reasons we elect politicians is because we believe they have a view of the world, a vision, some principles, some conviction And if they're seen to be lacking in conviction, even if the conviction that we thought they had was one we didn't agree with, then they appear to be empty. They become, you know, the hollow men or women, you know, a case of life imitating art perhaps. And that really is another vital element. So on all of these issues, I think this is where, you know, Labor has fallen down. But probably in the communication, they've done that poorly. They haven't explained what they're seeking to achieve. They have not done the analysis, the cost-benefit analysis that justifies, on the basis of evidence and experience, looking at alternatives. They haven't justified their policy directions. They haven't consulted widely or carefully enough. You know, one of the great things about consultation, and it's terrifically important, is that you can if you bring people in and make them feel it's their idea too. And so they develop a bit of ownership. And that could have been done with the mining tax, no question in my mind. They could have achieved some form of significant reform there with the industry having a high degree of ownership and collaboration. But, you know, that they blew that chance. And then finally, people have got to believe that you believe in what you're doing, that you are actually committed to it. And so, you know, while Julia Gillard is now back advocating a price on carbon or carbon tax, you know, people query, does she really believe in it? I mean, didn't she tell us during the election we weren't going to have a carbon tax, now we're having one? Well, she's tried to rationalise that as saying it's a path to an emissions trading scheme, but then didn't she, before the election, tell Kevin Rudd to dump the emissions trading scheme? So why is she doing this? So you know, is there any, can there be any doubt that people then come to the conclusion that she's only pursuing this as a means of keeping the Greens on side? Whereas before Kevin Rudd's abandonment of the ETS, people accepted that he did actually have a commitment to taking action on climate change, that he thought it was a big deal, and that the emissions trading scheme was, in his view, the most effective way of dealing with it. So those, I think, are the areas where the reasons why the government has fallen down. And they're fundamentally, in some respects, they're issues of process. Conviction, obviously, is not a process issue. The rest of them are arguably issues of process. And, you know, even the mistakes of the programs that are largely complete can be attributed to that. And I won't go on about the pink bats and the home insulation, which was just a complete debacle. It's a tragic debacle because of the lives that were lost. It's difficult to comprehend how a scheme could have been so poorly designed. But I'll just leave you with one example that I think is worth reflecting on, and that is the school building program. Now, as you recall, the government was of the view that the economy was about to fall into an abyss because of the global financial crisis, Lehman's collapse and so forth. And so they thought they would quickly spend $15 billion building school halls and, you know, other school buildings. And our response was, or my response as leader, was to say, look, we'll support injecting some money into the economy for school buildings. We don't think it needs to be so much. We think you're panicking. So why don't you spend less? And if it turns out, you know, we're too sanguine about the economic situation, you can always spend some more. So, you know, why fire off all your ammunition at once? But most importantly, we said, if you're going to spend money on school buildings, why don't you use the program that we already have in operation, which is a Liberal program called Investing in Our Schools. And that was one where we literally went out to schools and said, you tell us what you want to do. You tell us what, you know, your plan is, your dream. Okay, we want a covered learning area, or we want a new hall, or we want a, you know, video centre or a computer centre. And the school would come up and they would, obviously, the school community would get the best quotes they could. They'd probably rope in a few parents to help design it or build it, and they'd come up with a pretty keen proposal. And then the government would rank them and say, okay, that's great, here's a couple of $100 grand.